Margaret Hartwell had always prided herself on being the perfect hostess. For 37 years of marriage, she'd opened her doors to family, friends, and even strangers during the holidays, transforming her Victorian home into a winter wonderland that could rival any magazine spread. Her dining room table, which comfortably seated 12 but could be expanded to accommodate 18 with the leaves, had witnessed countless Christmas feasts, each one more elaborate than the last. But this Christmas would be different. It had started innocently enough in October when her daughter-in-law, Cheryl, had called with what she'd presented as a simple request. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Mom Margaret, she'd said in that sickeningly sweet voice she reserved for asking favors. I know you always host Christmas, and I was wondering if maybe this year we could invite my side of the family too? They've never had a real traditional Christmas dinner, and I thought it would be so meaningful. Margaret had hesitated. Her own family gatherings typically included 8 people, herself and her husband Robert, their son David and Cheryl, David's sister Linda with her husband and 2 children, and Robert's elderly mother. It was cozy, manageable, and allowed Margaret to maintain the standards she'd cultivated over decades of hosting. Margaret had asked, already mentally calculating place settings. Oh, not too many. Cheryl had laughed. Maybe 15 or 20? My parents, my 3 sisters and their families, my brother and his kids, my grandparents, and a few aunts and uncles who don't have anywhere else to go. Margaret's grip had tightened on the phone. 25 additional people would mean hosting 33 guests total. Her dining room would be impossible to use. They'd need to set up tables throughout the house. The cooking alone would require days of preparation, not to mention the cost of feeding that many people the kind of meal she was known for. Cheryl, sweetheart, that's quite a lot of people. Perhaps we could scale back a bit, or maybe alternate years. But Cheryl had already been prepared for resistance. Oh, Mom Margaret, I knew you'd understand. David and I have already told everyone about your famous Christmas dinners. My family is so excited they've been talking about nothing else. My grandmother especially. She's 86 and this might be her last Christmas. You wouldn't want to disappoint an elderly woman, would you? The manipulation had been expertly executed. Margaret had found herself agreeing, despite every instinct screaming against it. After all, what kind of mother-in-law would she be if she refused to welcome her son's wife's family? That had been 2 months ago. Since then, Margaret had thrown herself into preparations with the dedication of a military general planning a campaign. She'd researched recipes that could feed crowds, borrowed additional china from her sister, rearranged furniture to maximize seating, and spent countless hours at the grocery store, her cart overflowing with ingredients for dishes that would serve 33 people. The shopping alone had been astronomical. 3 turkeys instead of 1. Pounds and pounds of vegetables. Cases of wine. Her credit card statement from November had made Robert's eyebrows disappear into his hairline. Maybe we should ask David and Cheryl to help with the cost, he'd suggested gently. Margaret had shaken her head. They're young, they're saving for a house. We can handle it. Cheryl certainly never seemed short of money when it came to her weekly manicures or expensive handbags. As December progressed, Margaret had begun to feel the weight of the undertaking. Her usually pristine house was cluttered with extra chairs borrowed from the church, folding tables from the community center, and boxes of decorations she'd had to buy to make the expanded space look festive. Her back ached from the constant lifting and rearranging. She'd had to take time off work to accommodate all the preparations. But the final straw had come just 5 days before Christmas. Margaret had been at the grocery store, checking items off her seemingly endless list, when she'd run into her neighbor, Patricia. They'd chatted about holiday plans, and Patricia had mentioned seeing Cheryl at the new upscale restaurant downtown. She looked lovely, Patricia had said. Though I was surprised to see her there so close to Christmas. Wasn't she having a big family dinner at your place? I'd be too stressed to eat out if I were hosting that many people. Something in Patricia's tone had made Margaret pause. What do you mean? Well, she was with quite a crowd, looked like family. Lots of laughing and joking. She was telling the waiter about how they'd found the perfect solution for Christmas dinner. Something about how the old lady loves playing hostess, so we're all set. Patricia had flushed. I'm sorry, Margaret. I probably shouldn't have said anything. Margaret had stood there in the grocery store aisle, surrounded by boxes of stuffing mix and cranberry sauce, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. The phrase echoed in her mind. The old lady loves playing hostess. She was 62, hardly ancient, but more importantly, she was being discussed as if she were nothing more than convenient help. That evening, she'd tried to bring up the restaurant sighting casually with David when he'd stopped by to drop off the extra tablecloths she'd requested. Oh, yeah, he'd said without thinking. Cheryl's family had their own little pre-Christmas celebration at Romano's. Pretty expensive place, they must have dropped $800 easy. Cheryl said her dad wanted to treat everyone before they invaded your house, as he put it. David had laughed, oblivious to the effect his words were having on his mother. $800. They'd spent $800 on a restaurant meal while she'd been clipping coupons and shopping sales to afford feeding them all. And invaded your house, as if she were some kind of convenient venue, rather than a person opening her home out of generosity. Margaret had excused herself and gone to the bathroom, where she'd stared at herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed tired eyes, stress lines that hadn't been there in October, and hands that were cracked from constant dishwashing and cleaning. She looked exactly like what Cheryl's family apparently thought she was. The old lady who loves playing hostess. That night, lying in bed next to Robert's gentle snoring, Margaret had made a decision. She'd spent 40 years being taken advantage of by people who mistook her kindness for stupidity, her generosity for obligation. She was done. The next morning, she'd started planning. First, she'd called her travel agent. Eileen, what's the most luxurious, relaxing vacation package you have available for the 24th of December through the 2nd of January? Money is no object. The trip to Tuscany had been surprisingly affordable, especially when she'd calculated what she'd already spent on Christmas dinner preparations. A charming villa rental, wine tours, cooking classes, and complete relaxation. She and Robert deserved it after 37 years of marriage and decades of hosting obligations. Robert had been initially confused by the sudden vacation announcement, but what about Christmas dinner, Cheryl's family? Oh, Margaret had said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm sure they'll figure something out. After all, I wouldn't want to impose my old lady hostess tendencies on them. Next, she'd methodically called every vendor and reversed every order she could. The 3 turkeys? Cancelled and refunded. The cases of wine? Returned. The elaborate dessert order from the bakery? Cancelled with a cheerful explanation that plans had changed. She'd kept exactly what she would have needed for her original guest list of 8, and she donated those supplies to the local food bank with a note explaining they were for families who might need help with Christmas dinner. The borrowed furniture went back to where it came from. The extra decorations were returned to stores or packed away. Slowly, her house returned to its normal, elegant, manageable Christmas appearance. The beauty of her plan was in its complete reasonableness. She wasn't being vindictive or cruel, she was simply going on vacation. If Cheryl's family was disappointed, well, they were all adults. Certainly they could figure out alternative arrangements. It wasn't as if she'd made some kind of binding contract to feed them all. 3 days before Christmas, she'd finally called David. Sweetheart, I have some news. Your father and I have decided to take a little holiday trip to Italy. We leave tomorrow evening. The silence on the other end of the phone had been worth every penny she'd spent on the vacation package. Mom, what about Christmas dinner? Cheryl's family, they're all planning to come to your house. Oh my, Margaret had said, her voice full of manufactured surprise. Well, I'm sure you and Cheryl can work something out. Young people are so resourceful these days. Maybe one of her sisters could host instead. Or, you could all go back to that lovely restaurant Romano's, wasn't it? Mom, we can't afford to feed 30 people at a restaurant, and none of Cheryl's family has space for that many people. Margaret had mused. That is quite a predicament. Although, I suppose you could have asked about our Christmas plans before assuming we'd be available. Your father and I haven't had a vacation in 3 years, you know. She could hear David breathing heavily, probably running his hands through his hair the way he did when stressed. Mom, please, can't you change your plans? Cheryl's going to be devastated. Her whole family, David. Margaret had interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. I rearranged my entire house, spent thousands of dollars, took time off work, and nearly gave myself a nervous breakdown trying to accommodate everyone. Not once, in all that time, did anyone ask if I needed help, offer to contribute to the cost, or even check to see how I was managing. Instead, I found out that your wife's family thinks of me as the old lady who loves playing hostess, and that they were joking about invading my house. Did you really think I wouldn't hear about that? Another long silence. Mom, I'm sorry if... No, sweetheart. I'm not angry with you specifically, but I am tired. Tired of being taken for granted, tired of being treated like hired help in my own home, and tired of being expected to sacrifice my own comfort and happiness for people who clearly don't respect me. Your father and I are going to Italy, where we'll be treated like valued guests rather than convenient servants. That had been yesterday. This morning, Christmas Eve, Margaret and Robert had leisurely packed their bags, confirmed their transportation to the airport, and enjoyed a quiet breakfast together. Margaret felt lighter than she had in months. Her phone had been ringing constantly since the previous evening. First David, then Cheryl, then various members of Cheryl's family who had somehow gotten her number. The messages had evolved from confused inquiries to outright demands that she cancel her trip and honor her commitment. The most illuminating call had been from Cheryl's mother, a woman Margaret had never actually spoken to before. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dorothy Chen, Cheryl's mother. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding about Christmas dinner? No misunderstanding, Margaret had replied pleasantly. I'm going on vacation. But you invited us all for dinner. My whole family has been looking forward to this for months. Actually, Mrs. Chen, your daughter asked if her family could join our dinner, and I agreed to accommodate everyone. At no point did I sign a binding contract or commit to sacrificing my own holiday indefinitely. Since I've decided to take a vacation instead, you'll all need to make other arrangements. This is completely unreasonable. Do you have any idea how impossible it will be to find somewhere to eat Christmas dinner for 25 people on Christmas Eve? Margaret had smiled, remembering the $800 pre-Christmas celebration. I'm sure a family that can afford to spend $800 on a casual dinner at Romano's can find a solution. Perhaps you could call around to some nice hotels? Many of them serve Christmas dinner. The silence had been deafening. How did you? Dorothy had started. Know about your restaurant celebration? Word gets around, Mrs. Chen. Especially when your family members joke about the old lady who loves playing hostess and talk about invading my house. I'm sure you can understand why I might prefer to spend the holiday with people who actually appreciate my company. That call had ended abruptly. Now, as Margaret did a final check of their luggage and confirmed that the house was secure for their absence, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Through the window, she could see the Jones family next door hanging lights and preparing for their own modest celebration. The Kowalskis across the street were loading presents into their car, probably heading to visit grandparents. Normal families, making normal plans, treating each other with normal respect and consideration. Her phone buzzed with another call from David. She let it go to voicemail, but decided to listen to the message. Mom, please call me back. Cheryl is crying. Her family is furious, and I don't know what to do. Some of her relatives drove in from out of state. Her grandmother took a bus from 3 hours away. Please, can't you at least come back for just the dinner? We'll figure out the rest. Margaret felt a small pang of guilt about the elderly grandmother, but then she remembered how that same grandmother had been used as emotional manipulation 2 months ago. If Cheryl's family truly cared about the grandmother's Christmas experience, they would have made sure there was a solid backup plan, instead of simply assuming Margaret would always be available to serve their needs. Robert appeared in the doorway, looking handsome in his travel clothes. "Ready for Italy, my dear?" "More than ready," Margaret replied, taking his arm. As their taxi pulled away from the house, Margaret saw David's car turning onto their street. She felt a moment of sadness. She truly loved her son, and she hadn't wanted to hurt him. But some lessons could only be learned through experience, and this was apparently one of them. Her phone continued to buzz intermittently during the drive to the airport. Messages from Cheryl, from various Chen family members, even from Linda asking what was going on. Margaret turned the phone off and dropped it into her purse. At the airport, over champagne in the first-class lounge, Robert raised his glass to hers. "To unexpected adventures. To unexpected freedom," Margaret corrected, and they clinked glasses. 10 hours later they were in Rome, and then another hour to the villa in Tuscany. The January sun was surprisingly warm, the views were spectacular, and the local wine was everything the travel brochures had promised. Margaret spent her first evening on the terrace, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching the sunset paint the countryside in shades of gold and amber. Her phone, when she finally turned it back on to check for emergencies, showed 47 missed messages and 19 missed calls. She scrolled through them briefly. Anger, pleading, guilt-tripping, name-calling, and finally, grudging acceptance that she really wasn't coming back. The most recent message was from David. "Mom, I hope you're happy. We ended up at Golden Dragon Chinese restaurant. Half the menu was gone. The service was terrible. And it cost us $1,200. Cheryl's barely speaking to me. Her family thinks our whole family is crazy, and Grandma Chen spent the day crying. I hope your vacation is worth it." Margaret smiled and deleted the message. Then she opened her laptop and began writing a long email to her son. "David," she typed. "I am happy. Happier than I've been in months. Your father and I are in one of the most beautiful places on earth, being treated with kindness and respect by strangers, while eating food we didn't have to cook and sitting at tables we didn't have to set. I'm sorry that your Christmas dinner was disappointing and expensive, but perhaps now you understand what I was facing when I agreed to host 33 people. The difference is that I was planning to do it out of love and generosity, while you ended up doing it out of necessity and panic. I hope this experience teaches you and Cheryl something about taking people for granted. I also hope it teaches you about the difference between a gift freely given and a service that's assumed and expected. Your father and I have given you both 30 years of free babysitting, home-cooked meals, emergency loans, and endless support. We've hosted every holiday, birthday, and celebration without complaint. But somewhere along the way, these gifts became expectations, and we became convenient rather than cherished. We'll be back after New Year's. And we'll resume our relationship with new boundaries. Future holidays will be planned together, with everyone contributing according to their ability. Family dinners will be potluck style, and anyone who refers to me as the old lady will be cordially invited to make their own arrangements. I love you, sweetheart, but I love myself too. And I'm finally old enough and wise enough to act like it. P.S. The wine here is incredible, and your father looks 20 years younger already. Sometimes, the best gift you can give someone is letting them face the natural consequences of their choices. Consider this my Christmas gift to all of you. She sent the email, then closed the laptop and rejoined Robert on the terrace. Any regrets? He asked, refilling her wine glass. Margaret looked out over the rolling hills, breathed in the crisp air, and felt muscles she hadn't realized were tense. Finally begin to relax. Only that I didn't do this years ago. 3 weeks later, when they returned home, tanned, rested, and full of stories about cooking classes and wine tastings, they found a beautiful flower arrangement on their doorstep. The card was from Cheryl's mother. Thank you for teaching us all an important lesson about appreciation. We hope we can start fresh. The Chen family. Inside the house, the answering machine light was blinking with what appeared to be dozens of messages, but Margaret didn't check them immediately. Instead, she and Robert sat in their perfectly appointed living room, in their comfortable chairs, sharing a quiet cup of tea, and planning their next adventure. The messages could wait. After all, she was no longer the old lady who loves playing hostess. She was simply Margaret Hartwell, woman of the world, who had finally learned the most important lesson of all: the difference between being generous and being taken for granted. And next Christmas? Well, next Christmas would be different too. But this time, the difference would be her choice.